Hello everybody and welcome back to the Intro to Investing series here with VectorVest. And I know we've talked a lot lately about a lot of different terms and terminology when it comes to investing in the stock market. And maybe you're not quite familiar with these terms yet, so this video is going to be all about breaking it down. What does this stuff mean? What exactly is he saying? So let's get started. The first term I want to break down is bull market, and specifically bull market and bear market. So when somebody says we're in a bull market scenario or the market is bullish right now, what does this mean? Are we talking about an animal? No. Bull market simply means that the market is moving higher. When the market is in an up situation, the market is in a bull situation or a bull market situation, or a bull market scenario. Now the opposite is true when we talk about a bear market. We're not talking about bears here, but a bear market situation simply happens when the market is moving lower. Now the next term I want to talk about is dividend. We hear this term all the time, especially when we're talking about passive income. So what exactly is a dividend? A dividend is the payment that a company makes to its owners or its investors. So how does this work? At the end of the year or at the end of the period, a company has a net profit. Now we can do one of two things with this net profit. We can reinvest it into the company in hopes that the company is going to continue to grow and continue to make more money over the future. Well, the second option we have is we can pay the owners and we can pay the investors a portion or all of this net profit if we wish, and this is what we call a dividend. So instead of taking these retained earnings or instead of taking these earnings from the company and reinvesting them into the company, we simply pay out the profit to investors, and this is where we get our dividends. Dividends can be an excellent source of passive income because you don't have to work for it. You simply own the share, and at the end of the period, when the company makes money, they pay out the investors. Now I know I've mentioned the word exchange or stock exchange a few times. So what exactly is an exchange or a stock exchange? A stock exchange is simply a place where think of it like an auction house. It's where you go to buy and sell shares of stock. Now, if you've watched any sort of financial TV, if you've talked to anybody about investing in the stock market, you've heard the term index before. So what is an index? We have the S&P 500, the Nasdaq, the Dow Jones. There are several indexes out there, but what exactly are they? Now, an index is a basket of stocks or a basket of securities that represent something of interest. So whether we're looking at the S&P 500 and we're talking about the overall market, the S&P 500 is a basket of stocks which represents the overall market. Now the Nasdaq is a lot more tech focused. So when we're talking about the Nasdaq Index, we're talking a lot more about technology companies and technology shares. And here at VectorVest, we have what's called the VectorVest Composite Indicator. And this is an arithmetic average of all of the stocks that are tracked on a certain database. This does extremely well to represent the overall market because, after all, it's an average of all of the stocks that are traded on that market. So ETF, I'm sure you've heard ETF by now. And what exactly is that? ETF stands for Exchange Traded Fund, and it's very similar to an index, with one difference. ETFs are traded just like stocks are. So you can have an ETF that tracks the S&P 500 and you're able to go out and buy shares of this ETF just as you would a regular stock, and you can sell them anytime you wish as well. So if you would like to trade the S&P 500, you would simply go out and you would find an ETF that tracks the S&P 500 and buy or sell that instead. Now ETFs can be based on a variety of things, and they're almost limitless. You can have ETFs on currencies, on baskets of stocks, on certain industries. Anything that you would like to track, I'm sure there's an ETF out there for you. Now IPO. I've mentioned this in some of my previous videos, but IPO stands for Initial Public Offering. And this is the first time a stock is able to be traded and investors are able to purchase shares in a specific company. So for example, let's say I have Company Clay and I know it's time for me to raise capital. I want to expand the business, and the best way that I can find to do so is through the issuance of shares. So I do what's called an IPO, or an initial public offering, and I make these shares available to investors. I sell them to investors, and I take in the money, and in turn, I reinvest this money in the business in hopes to grow the business. The next two terms I want to talk about are long and short. Now these are very similar to bull and bear. So what does it mean to be long? Long is simply another word for buy. If I want to buy a stock, I go long in that stock. And if I want to short a stock, I want to play that stock or that company to the downside. Now, shorting a stock can be a lot more difficult to understand than buying a stock. Buying a stock is fairly simple. I think the company is going to go up in value or up in price, so I go out and I buy that stock, and at a later date, when it's at a higher price, I sell the stock. Now, what do I do if I think the company is going to go down in price? I don't have to own the share, but I can play it to the downside, or I can short sell. Now, short selling simply means that I sell the stock when it's high, and I intend to rebuy that stock back when it's lower. So if I short a stock, I'm simply playing it to the downside. Ticker or ticker symbol. A ticker symbol is simply the letter or abbreviation that we see listed on stock exchanges that represent a company. So of course some companies have really long names, and we're not going to list these companies out by name. Instead we use ticker symbols. Now, market cap. This one might be a little bit tricky, but market cap is very simple. Market cap or market capitalization is simply the amount of shares outstanding multiplied by the share price or the current share price. Now, what does this do? This gives us the total value of a company. So for example, if Company Clay has 10 million shares outstanding and its current share price is $10 per share, Company Clay would be worth or have a market cap of $100 million. All I did there was multiply 10 million times the $10 per share price, and I got 100 million. Volume. What is volume? No, this doesn't mean that I'm talking louder or I'm talking softer. No, volume is the amount of shares that are traded during a certain time frame. So if we want to know what the volume of a share is, or what the volume of a company is per day, we would take the total amount of shares that were traded during that day. Let's say Company Clay has a lot of interest and people are buying and selling 1 million shares per day. This means that the volume for Company Clay is 1 million shares on a daily basis. And finally, EPS, or earnings per share. What does earnings per share mean? It sounds pretty straightforward, but let's just break it down a little bit so that we're not confused. Earnings per share, we all know that at the end of the day, company has revenue and we got our expenses, and we make it all the way down to the bottom of the income statement, and we have our net profit or our earnings. So we simply divide earnings, the total earnings, by the total number of shares outstanding, and this gives us earnings per share. So to use the example from earlier, if Company Clay has 10 million shares outstanding and its total earnings at the end of the year were $1 million, then the earnings per share would be 10 cents per share. I got this simply by dividing the total earnings by the total number of shares outstanding. Now hopefully this clears up a lot of the confusion that we've had with some of these terms, and we can go forward being a little bit more comfortable with the terminology used in the stock market. Now if you guys are interested in what exactly you can do with this stock, please stay tuned for the next video. And as always guys, if you've liked this content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, join the VV Nation, give this video a like, share it with your friends, and as always, I hope you have a great day.